Trapper Burdick.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next thing we will do is have a pledge of allegiance to the flag of the Fairfield Station. Thank you. The next item we have is review of any corrections that need to be made in the minutes for May 1st. Did you wish to? Okay, thank you, Doris. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at the minutes, and are there any corrections or changes? There's not changes, but corrections we need to make?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we accept the minutes.
Have a motion, is there a second to that?
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded, we approve the minutes from May 1st, 2018. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen. On the schedule is to present plaques to R.D. Campbell and Don Torgerson for their service on the Planning Commission.
And we've tried to contact them. Artie's hauling cows to Colorado today, and Don wasn't able to attend either. So we'll try again. We just want to, give them their plaques, but they're not. Yeah. So we weren't able to do it this time.
And you'll kind of follow up on that.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. The next item is any public comment on any of the agenda items. I think you gentlemen are here on a specific item, so I don't see anyone that wants to comment on any of the agenda items. And the next item we have is the review of the conditional use permit for Basin Industries, Todd Thorne and Scott Bingham. Scott, do you want to come up the microphone, or are you more comfortable sitting there? What's your pleasure?
I'll sit right here.
Okay. On this item, excuse me, as most of the Planning Commission are aware that under the oath that you take when we get on this panel is it's our duty to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Carbon County. So kind of keep that in the back of your minds. That's what we want to do. Back in December of 2017, we entered into a conditional use permit with Basin Industries, Mr. Scott Bingham, and basically, and you've got copies of that in your packet, it is that he'll comply with all laws and regulations, comply with all laws of Carbon County, comply with all adopted codes. Property will be kept free of debris, flammable materials, etc. No trash to be located in open areas, located only at the identified property, and the conditional use permit has a 7-foot side obscuring fence, outdoor storage of materials limited to the height of side obscuring fence. We need to know about engineered storm drainage, and that has to be approved by the county engineer or the Department of Environmental Quality. Vehicle entrances are to be kept free of debris, etc. Spills, etc. will be addressed. He will mitigate all and any dangerous materials. On-site location for truck tire wash. Those conditions, like I mentioned, were entered into in December of 2017. That was 163 days ago, and according to the information we've received, there has not been compliance with several of these items, so we need to discuss those. We do have some possible actions we can take as a board, and in looking over what we have and in conversations with legal counsel, we could agree to extensions for specific dates on some of the items, and that would require that those items be inspected and completed in compliance and to the agreement of the building official of Carbon County. And then the other thing we could do would be to let Basin Industries continue to operate without coming into agreement. I think we do need to get some updates on what is going on, and so I'll ask you, Scott, if you would review what, if any, I apologize for saying it that way, what items you've done in reference to the conditional use permit you signed to bring this into compliance with that conditional use permit.
Can I maybe just talk for a minute on Dustin, usually on behalf of Scott?
If you're going to address this, would you just step up the microphone so it gets caught on the recorder?
So, a couple of things. I know that this is Scott Hacking from Department of Environmental Quality. He was there today, and I think they've come up with a plan that will work. He and Scott have worked together in the past on his other on the one in Price and his one in Vernal, and I think they've come up with a plan to get that underway. As far as the issue with the compliance with the Department of Environmental Quality.
And this is on the drainage.
Correct.
And help me here if you would. What kind of time frame would be on that?
You know, I don't know how. I know they've come up with a plan, correct?
Obtaining the permit is a pretty easy process. You can actually do it over the internet. So I would encourage Mr. Goodman to do that ASAP. It's not a high dollar permit, stormwater permit.
Would 60 days be okay? Would that be acceptable?
That'd have to be talked about and with the agreement of the county attorney and the building department, because we're so far out of compliance now.
Well, part of the problem is that to maybe update you a couple of times is it's not as if it's been ignored. The 2 times Mr. Bingham's actually come, not just called, he actually came in and wanted to meet with Todd, and they weren't able to be. He's actually come in. I don't know if Todd knew this or not, but he's actually, I didn't know this until last night. He says, look, I've been there twice. Not only, I didn't just call, I went in to see him because I wanted him to come out and say, hey, let's go look at the property and actually have him come out and come up with a solution that works. And I want I think there's a couple of some information that I think would be important. Is if you look at the old Basin Industries, where he was before out on, I don't know, the old byproducts plant, you notice there's a site obscuring fence that Mr. Bingham put up on his own. This commission couldn't have made him put one in. He was grandfathered in, and on his own, he did that. He put it in. And so it's not, his purpose hasn't been to not be in compliance, and up until then, he was saying, hey, I'm working on getting into compliance, I'm moving, I'm working on there's lots and lots of things for me to do to get this place going. He assumed until he received the last letter that he thought, hey, I'm making progress on all of this stuff.
What were we making progress on?
Getting it moved in, putting in concrete.
Which conditional item was he working on?
He's been making sure that there isn't a problem with with it being any dirt tracking. I mean, I guess part of it is there's some confusion. Are you saying he needs to have a tire washout? Is that the new standard for the county?
No, we've had this conversation.
That's part of what's been
and
brought
so, and if Scott has come into the office to meet with me and I haven't been notified, there's been no messages left, anything for me to come out and to visit with you to discuss this. That's why we sent the letter, because I haven't heard anything. I've talked with Sandy. I talked with you yesterday. We're hung up on this tire wash. We had an issue with off tracking of mud
at the old place.
At the old place. Correct. So we didn't want the same thing happening. So we, on number 13, install location for trucks to off track mud or install a tire wash.
Correct.
We have no issue with that.
Okay.
Everything that he's done out there, as far as the off tracking of mud, no concerns.
Okay.
What our concerns are is.
Let me address that with Richard.
Well, just a minute. Todd still has the floor, and Todd wanted to give you his list of what his concerns are. So let him just finish that briefly, and then let's hear Mr. Bingham.
So we've the letter that was sent was to address the site obscuring fence around the property and the outdoor storage of materials limited to the height of the site obscuring fence, and the storm drainage plan needs to be approved by either the county engineer or DEQ, which you're in the process of working with. So of the things that we're concerned about with this is the site obscuring fence and the storage of the material.
Okay.
And the level of the storage of the material has decreased. The pile has been reduced. And so we're left with the issue of the site obscuring fence.
Okay, let me address that. When I left here last time, I told you I was not going to sign the letter of intent because of the egregious nature, and Todd even admitted that it was an extremely burdensome requirement to have the tire washing. I said, what about the fence? I have no problem putting a fence up if it's necessary and needed. And the commission wanted to push that through, and they says, fine, we'll throw the tire washing thing out, get a hold of Todd on the fence. And that's why I've been in his office several times to get with him and discuss. Maybe some of it needs to be fenced, but not, it makes no sense.
Why didn't you bring that up on?
I tried to, and it just got pushed off, and somebody in the commission said,
Your signature's on here, why did you sign it?
because you guys had the items on there, and I said, fine, you take over. Fine.
Okay, well, I just want to, we've got bids for a side
One
obscuring
more
fence.
thing, let me talk about the material piled up. The reason it was piled up is because I had bought several pieces of equipment to process that,
New equipment when he moved.
and we never could get it needed valves, it needed this, and it needed that, and then days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. Nowhere to put the stuff but to pile it up. And I feel extremely offended that you men would rather have a washer and a dryer and an old automobile sitting in every home in this county versus just one place to hold it. And if you think for 1 minute that I wanted that pile of stuff to pile up, that's my paycheck. I wanted that out immediately. That isn't the way I want to do business. I don't want it to be, you need to see where I live. Butchart Gardens would push, if you know where that's at, famous garden, would push to have the beautiful landscaping that we have around our home.
Well,
I try to do the same thing in this environment as well. So for the fact that that was piled up, there was a reason for it. We've got that pile taken down. And at that point is when I wanted to talk to Todd and say, let's now talk about the fence.
and he just mentioned that had been somewhat corrected. I haven't inspected it, and that's their job.
And
However,
we were put down into another part of the yard, which I don't want to be there. We're cleaning that up now from that pile, the non-ferrous and et cetera.
however, don't want to quarrel about what's transpired, want to know what's going to happen in the future.
I want to have a nice tidy yard. I want something that the county can be proud of.
Put a date on that for us, Scott.
Well, but we got to talk about what it is that needs to be done and when. We agree with that, but I think we want to talk about that for a minute. So part of what Scott's concern is, and that's why I brought up the old yard, is I want you to say it's not like Scott's saying, hey, I'm not going to follow. He's saying, man, let's make sure that things make sense. What I'm saying to you is where he was before, and part of the reason he's not there is that the county was giving him a hassle about being there and about his scale, that he had a right to have, that he has a right to have there. It was there before the county was given a right-of-way by the owner. That doesn't give the county then the right to say, hey, you can't have a scale there. He still gets to have a scale there. But nevertheless, he's moved. And what I'm trying to explain to you is, look at the improvement that was there. Over time, when Dave Swenson had it, it was a shithole. The place was a mess. When Scott bought it, he cleaned it up. He put gravel in. He put a site obscuring fence on his own without anybody requesting it. His concern about the site obscuring fence is this. One, it's not going to work. So what he's requesting is, can I have a site obscuring fence on the east side? Because part of the problem is, I think does everyone know I'm sure you guys know what property we're talking about. And as you drive by, if we had a 15-foot tall site obscuring fence, you're still going to see what's in there because it's elevated. So if we have a fence that's that tall, you're still going to see what's there.
So is one concern the fence?
Correct. Other than the fence, I don't think there's two things.
Let me ask our legal counsel, would it be agreeable, do you think, with the county and with the building department to discuss that as an individual item and have a response worked out that may be agreeable?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I guess what I want to hear from him is what the proposal is. In other words, I'd like to hear
Sure.
a specific proposal that with distances and this section of the fence we will make obscuring, this section will be this high, that kind of thing.
Okay. May I approach to give you guys, to have the whole thing done, the whole site obscuring put around just at 6 feet, $35,000. Scott's like, man, that's a ton of money. and it doesn't do much. I mean, if it actually made it so it cleaned the place up, he says that doesn't make sense. What he's saying is, look, I get as people are driving by on Highway 10, we need to have that site obscured. But part of the other problem is, he already has a 6-foot fence up. And I think Todd is, I don't know, Todd doesn't get to speak for whoever it is, but he's saying, I think a 6-foot would be sufficient. So what Scott is saying is, I've got no problem with site obscuring on the east side. So that as you're looking west, you would see that. But man, he's like, to my north, if I put one up, I've got it's not a junkyard, but it is a junkyard. To my south, I've got, I don't even know what it is. And to his
They already have a site
obscuring fence
obscuring
there,
fence
correct,
150 feet away from mine anyway.
correct.
So the only thing I'd be obscuring.
So
is
what we're saying is, let us put up a site obscuring fence on the east side. We'll maintain the fence. The other problem is, it's just not feasible to have we don't have a problem having a limit on the height. And so what Scott is saying, he's like, man, there was a pile out there and it was a mess. But so you understand that this isn't just Scott just saying, hey, I don't care what the county's saying. He's like, man, I don't know what to do with it. I bought a new baler. As he moved there, he bought a new baler to make it better.
Don't talk about the past, talk about the
Well,
future.
okay, fair enough. So what we're saying is, can we put a site obscuring fence on the east side and not have a site obscuring fence on the remainder of the property?
What about the tenants that are on the east side of that property?
I'm the tenant, I'm the next one. I own the property across the street from that as well.
Oh, your I-mark steel too?
That's the west.
The west.
West, yeah. I don't know east and west, so you got.
You're talking about further away from the highway.
Yeah.
And if Matt wanted a fence there, then, you know, I'm not opposed to that either.
So,
Except if the winds that come through there might pack up half the county and take us to Colorado border.
So that's what our proposal would be, and maybe what would make some sense is if we could. Part of it is I only got involved yesterday, and the first thing I did was call Todd, and in the limited amount of time, was it yesterday? Yesterday was Monday, because I wasn't involved, and I said, hey Todd, can we try to get? And there just wasn't enough time to try to get for us to try to get that worked out. What my suggestion is, and other than the fence, have we addressed everything else that was an issue?
Everything other than the fence, yes, has been addressed. Meeting with Mr. Hacking from DEQ, that's starting the process. I know there's a process behind getting all that approved, but sounds like you're working on that issue. So where the issue seems to be the site obscuring fence.
Correct.
And how we're going to mitigate that.
So I have a couple comments.
Sure.
A 7-foot fence isn't going to cover a huge pile of scrap. I mean, it almost seems ridiculous to have it there. Whether it's 7 or whether it's 6, it really doesn't matter.
And I think what Todd has said is he thought, I mean, obviously he doesn't speak, is he doesn't think that we need to go any higher than what's there. He says, man, that seems pretty crazy it'd be one thing if we hadn't put a fence up and we needed to put one in. I don't think putting a 7 versus a 6 would matter, but since we already have a 6 foot there, I think Todd has basically said he thought the county would be okay with having a 6 foot fence there. But, so really the question is, what portions need to be site obscuring?
Have there been any complaints?
No,
Yes.
There's been a lot of customers come because they saw that there was a place they could move their scrap if they didn't order there.
So have there been complaints?
There has.
Just a minute, Scott.
Yes.
Tuesday of last week, we had 45 customers. Last Friday, we had about another 45 customers, at a tune of almost $10,000 on each day. I'm here to
That's
tell you, the money didn't stay in those individuals' pockets by morning time. It got dumped back into this community, and there was a lot of business in between those days as well. We move a volume, a lot of stuff, and I don't want to pile up. When it's piled up, my wallet's
Empty.
like it is right now, it's empty.
When we get through crying for you.
Has there been any complaints?
Yes, there's been some complaints about the height of the material and with the site obscuring fence, or
Okay.
lack
From
thereof,
employees or from taxpayers?
from taxpayers.
Okay. And I'm assuming those are probably neighbors?
Yes.
And I'm not trying, we're not trying, I know Mr. Bingham wants to be a good, I know
Yeah.
how he is with his neighbors. I know he wants to be a good neighbor.
Mr. Hughley,
Yeah,
I think we understand the issue with the site
okay?
fence and the issues that need to be resolved. Are there other issues?
The one that just
I was just going off of what Mr.
infuriated me the most.
But let's not get into it unless there's not an issue. There's no point in
Let's get into it. Let's fix the problem.
On my old yard, I'm still in the process of cleaning that up. We work on it every week, trying to get it in a position that I can either sell it or rent it. Pulled the scale out, filled the pit full of dirt, reject coal gravel that's all over this county, and filled it up with about a drop about that big. And the reason I didn't fill it all the way up and heap it is because I planned on coming back in with either road base or cement or something, and I basically was filling it up so somebody wouldn't come driving in there and find themselves in a big coffin at the bottom of that pit. And I think the thing that insults me the most is you think that I'm just, cosmetically I want to fix it up to and get the top dollar out of it. I want it to look the best, and I think the intelligence that I've been accused with, that I was so stupid just to do that, just really offended me.
Let me, I appreciate what you're doing there, and I understand what you're trying to do, and it's commendable. But that's a different issue than the conditional use permits you have on base.
It was put in as a PS at the bottom of my letter.
So,
That's what lit the match to me, right?
yeah. So, aside from the history, what other items?
I don't think, my understanding is that's the only issue. Well, I think there is one, which is, man, I just don't think it's feasible that that scrap be only allowed to be the height of the fence. And part of that is, I mean, if we're gonna get equipment that comes in that's higher than 6 feet tall. And what I guess, and then generally when it gets stacked, and the issue I'm having is, even if we had a 12-foot fence and we stacked it 10 feet, you'd still see it, no matter what. And so, how tall are your bales?
30 inches each.
Okay, so we'd like to be able to at least be able to stack his bales 3 high, which would make them 90 inches, 8 feet. Just under.
Yeah, and the bales won't look,
Yeah, I think we're more worried about like a large piece of sheet metal or something of that nature. It's going to get away. You brought up the point that the wind blows heavy out there.
Correct.
We live near that area, and that's what the complaint is. And then it's all over the highway, and everybody driving through town thinks Carbon County is not as beautiful as your neighborhood. That's the point of this. We're trying to take steps to move
Absolutely,
that
and so
forward.
if it's loose, I think having it under 6 feet is reasonable. If it's loose, if it's some piece of equipment that's bigger than that, it is, and if it's the bales, that they not be over 3 high.
So I think the original reason for the 7-foot obscuring fence is that there's a provision in the portion of the development code that talks about landscaping. All industrial developments shall be fully landscaped as per a plan submitted to and approved by the Planning Commission. I think that's supposed to address these issues. I think that's what we were hoping for, and I think that was part of what the fence issue was supposed to deal with. And I think that's why this provision is in there, is to do that. So I don't know that we couldn't relook at a different landscaping plan that mitigates the detrimental effects of the intended use of the lot. And I think that's what the 7-foot side obscuring fence was supposed to do, was to be that, basically was supposed to act as that landscaping plan, more or less.
Okay.
So I think we're right that the goal here is to make this place as visibly nice as possible and to obscure as much of it as can reasonably be expected. But I guess the question is the landscaping fence, is a site obscuring fence the right thing to do for that? Right now, that's the condition that I think the county has the right to impose. What I'm hearing from Mr. Bingham is that, well, the fence might not accomplish your purposes.
Correct. That, absolutely. That absolutely is correct.
But I'm also hearing there is some utility, some value to having some kind of fence, some kind of site obscurement there too. And I think the county's right to ask for that. So I guess the question is, how do we come to some kind of resolution here? Do you have whether the board has a proposal or Mr. Thorne has a proposal on what we do? You're within your rights to say, no, we're just going to stick to this as it's written. But maybe we can work collaboratively to come up with another plan.
If I heard the conversation right, the big thing is the fence that you want to discuss.
Correct.
And would it be appropriate for yourself, Mr. Bingham, and the building department to get together and work something out?
That would be my suggestion,
And we need to set
a
a
time.
date specific. Now,
Correct.
this is a question for the county attorney, is if we do some of these things, would it be appropriate to change and update the conditional
Sure,
use
we can
permit?
always amend that,
And
absolutely.
maybe that would be more palatable to everybody.
Yes.
But we need to set a date definite when this would transpire and when it would go into effect, not a,
I would suggest that we get together as a committee before your next planning and zoning.
And I was actually going to
powwow
say if
about
we
it
can
and
have
get-
two
kick
of them.
some
If we
ideas
could go
around.
to 60 date, if we could go to 2, it's just, I'm busy, he's busy, Mr. Thorne's busy, everybody. If we probably could get it done in 30, but I would say that let's put it on the, and let's be back here, not for the,
I think.
August.
I
Not
think
for
we'd be
July,
back
but
in
for
July.
August.
what's that?
you're looking at the August.
Yeah, and if we can get it done before then, we'll ask to have us put on July and we'll come in and ask to have it reviewed.
Okay, so then, would it be that you would want this board to agree to an extension, date specifics, to correct those issues, specifically the fence and maybe something else? I shouldn't have said something else. But,
How about to make sure that we have compliance or that we've made a change in, to request a change in the conditional use permit?
I think they need to, within the next meeting, have at least a preliminary plan to us to know that we're moving forward.
Okay.
We got a letter going back over the 60 days, and now we're showing up at the meeting, and you're wanting to get it forward. We need to see progress, I think, and I think on paper.
And that has been, you know, we've mentioned several times you've come in to speak with me, and we have personnel here Monday to Friday, so I've been able to be contacted to meet with you. When we signed this, I've talked to you and said we're willing to work with you on this, and I know you're shaking your head no.
No, I'm saying, we agree, look, it's just that we had a bad
And
time.
so we're willing to work on it, and we get it that, you know, the verbiage on the fence, we can adjust and we can work with you. It's just, I asked, when I talked to Sandy a week ago, I says, come in with a plan so we know what you're doing. We gave you a letter over 60 days ago, and then when I talked to Sandy, he says, come in with a plan so we know what you're doing, and now we're,
I've buried 2 family members in the last week. Can you and I meet in the morning and we kick around a couple of ideas? and some
we can meet in the morning.
Your ideas?
Yep, and that way, we know what's going on, because we keep, you know, kicking the can down the road. Nobody's able to get any resolution by doing that.
I don't think 30 days is, it's just,
Well, and if we do the 30 days,
We can
we
always
put
get
it in
more
front
if
of
we've
us,
gotten
and we
some
can
things
make our
done.
comments back to you, and then hopefully maybe in the 60 days, we can have something's finalized, and we can walk away
maybe we
with
can have it
a
done in 30 days.
good parties.
I don't
That
have a
sounds
problem
good.
with having it 30 days. I just wanted to make sure that we're not wasting
yeah,
each
and
other's
let me
time.
just, again, Christian, does that meet with your schedule to meet with these guys?
I don't know that I need to be involved unless I'm asked to be, but, I
I'm
mean,
not
I think
planning on
it's
being
more a matter of,
I think Todd is
Scott and I can do it.
that's what I
very
think.
capable of.
Yeah.
I think these two can get it figured out. I don't know that, I'm not planning on being involved unless I have to be.
Flippantly, I want you to sign an agreement that you agree with everything that Todd says. And I do mean that with levity, not with.
I have a quick question. So, just really surface. I mean, what are you thinking of? 6-foot fence? Just put slats in it?
That's one of the things I would really not want to do. But-
Okay.
But I've got some proposals that I'd like to show.
He's got some signs that maybe he'd like to put up that would actually
And
help
I've got
and be
some-
site
Some
obscuring.
sightless metal or some metal as well.
Yeah. You could put scrap in front of the fence to obscure the fence.
Well,
You know, I really
Any-
would like
any
to maybe do
seconds?
that, put a
Just
no
kidding.
pulse flag or something up in the air about 60 feet or something, kind of like a flag. To
Well-
answer Richard's previous question, we've put about $60,000 worth of concrete in there. We're still not done. I'm also looking at some in there too. It's not like I'm not still working on it. And no one's put a gun to my head or anything on that. I just would like to, the time lapsed, that Todd and I never got together. This probably could have been addressed had we done that. And then we come up with a plan by 9 o'clock in the morning, we should have a plan as to what needs to do. He just needs to see what we're up against, what information he has, and give me some suggestions, and
I think,
we'll quit kicking the can.
and I'm babbling too much, but it seems like we're in somewhat of an agreement to an extension to discuss those items, or that item that's giving you heartburn, and that I would think that maybe we have a motion on this agenda item to agree with an extension with specific dates to come into compliance as discussed in this meeting. Does that sound? I'm looking at the attorney because he always tells me I screw up.
No, I think that's good.
Is somebody
I second it.
comfortable with that motion?
No motion to second.
What was the motion?
The motion is to agree to an extension with specific dates to come into compliance with the conditional use permit.
Well, I think you ought to, let me just pitch it. I think we ought to schedule a review hearing for next month and at least get an update on where things are at. That would be my recommendation, to at least
He's
hear from
expressed
him.
interest in completing within 30 days. I mean, is
Well, then make him come back in 30 days, is my suggestion.
is that something that can go down by email, or does that have to be done?
No,
Has to be done here.
you need to do that here. I think you need to, I don't know that you have to require Mr. Bingham to be here, but I think that you ought to put it on as an agenda item, and then if Mr. Bingham wants to come, he can come, but at least you get an update from staff as to where things are going.
Mr. Lovelace, are you making a motion?
I motion to do whatever you said you're gonna do. I don't know, like, I motion to, I don't know what to say, to look at the canal, I don't know.
Would it maybe
Follow
be a
up with
motion to
Review
place this
again.
item on the next agenda as a review item to see what progress has been made on this matter? All of you can amend that or run with it or throw it away or change it, however you'd like.
Yeah, I agree. Table this item to the next meeting and then prepare for us a draft or final copy of what your plan will be for landscape / fencing. And then at the end, either we can continue it to the next month for final approval if we have to make some changes, or we could approve that at point.
So it'd be both a status check and the presentation of a draft proposal,
That's what I propose, yeah.
draft landscaping proposal.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Been moved and seconded. Do you have enough to formulate that on, reduce it to writing, Doris? Okay, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. And that-
Okay.
Oh, we need to vote on that, yeah, thanks. All those in favor say aye. Any
Just to,
Maybe we'll tell.
Just a
Fuels
comment on
about
that.
drainage too.
Basin
Yeah, we'll make sure
Industries in
Doc
the
gets
Uinta
it in the
Valley,
middle tomorrow.
we drove by there last week, and they have piles way high, but they're organized and they look good. So, if that means anything.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the gentleman from DEQ. What type of drainage system are you proposing for this installation? We don't do a drainage system per se, but it's our stormwater permit to keep anything from washing off the property that's contaminated. So they'll need to do site berms or otherwise control runoff from the property. And that's the stormwater permit that he needs to apply for. It's a pretty easy process, but he has not started that yet. Did he have to get a permit to discharge if the pond fills up? If it's more than a 10-year, 24-hour event, then we assume it might wash off. So the major storms you just can't do a lot about. But the average storm, he has to contain all the runoff on his property. Will he have to also put in stuff to handle any greases or oils that may be? That's not allowed to wash off, so he needs to keep all that on his property. Yeah, and that's the stormwater permit. He has that in the vernal facility. He needs to do the same here in Price.
Now, I'm assuming that'd be approved by our county engineer, correct, Todd?
Yeah, so they'll work with DEQ. Curtis will also review it, because I know DEQ has specific standards.
Right, and
And,
yours might be a little different.
yep, Curtis and DEQ will work together and say, okay, that is sufficient to meet their needs, our needs. We're good with it. And when that's worked out, we'll bring that to Planning Commission just so you know, hey, here's what it is. There's going to be a lot of nerdy language in there that I don't understand. So,
Is, Christian, is it okay to assume that Todd's gonna be talking to, Scott tomorrow or whenever in the future and say this is also needs to be addressed at the same site plan? Cause if we figure that's landscaping and everything can be a part of the drainage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think those are good instructions to give him and tell him,
Yep.
as you prepare your landscape plan, which includes site obscuring structures, you also need to be including with that your permit process. Yeah, absolutely.
Does Todd have your contact information?
Yes.
Yes.
We
Okay.
talk all the
Yep.
time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, I had one comment for Todd, if that's okay.
Sure.
Todd, obviously, I've read in the paper recently about copper theft and wire theft.
Uh-huh.
And so I can see that as an issue there where there's potentially valuable material for people to go there and steal. I'm also looking at the idea of, while it's in an industrial area, that doesn't mean that kids won't want to get in there and mess around. So I'm thinking, while we don't necessarily need a site obscuring fence around the whole property, I still think it might be advisable to be fenced for the entire property.
So the entire property is fenced.
Okay.
So the whole perimeter is fenced. He does have security cameras around his whole location, and I know I've talked to him before because theft is a concern of his, because when people come and scrap things, get in there and steal it and try to pawn it off somewhere else is a major concern of his. So he's doing what he can to address those issues and keep people out who he doesn't want in. So he's very cognizant of that. So I know his main gates lock, and then everything else is a chain link fence around it. His property.
Mr. Chair, if I might make a comment. A concern I would have is what about the neighbors who have already abided by this, like TJ Nunley with his site obscuring fence? You know, he paid the $6,000, whatever it cost to make it site obscuring. If you guys make deviations, picking and choosing favorites, that then opens up a can of worms for the commission, who they're going to come and appeal to, or to the appeals officer, or to whoever. So there is some level of consistency that we need to maintain, and I would just add that for information purposes.
Thank you, Commissioner. I still think we need a vote to move forward on the motion that was made. All those in favor say aye. You did that. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. The next item we have on the agenda is the review and recommendation to the Commission of proposed amendments to Carbon County Development Code, Section 3, zoning general requirements.
I'm missing my copy. The next one. So with Section 3, we had our public hearing last month. There's a few changes that we made. That were suggested from the public and also from the Planning Commission. So those changes have been addressed. We had a discussion on gravel pits and versus material staging area. So we added to, we deleted gravel pits as a temporary use and put material staging area on line 664 and 6699. That way we don't have gravel pits that are set up as a temporary use, but we can stage material and all of that. And we have a definition that, once again, new definitions already that are coming into play that will add to Section 9 when we do an update in January that specifically addresses material staging area. Actually, no, that was added into, it was the butcher shop we didn't get added in. So material staging area is in our new definitions. So that's all taken care of. I think that was our biggest discussion point last month was those gravel pits. So is there any other comments or, Gary?
Yes, I have one.
Mhm.
It's concerning gravel pits.
Mm-hmm.
Is this gravel pit, is this gonna be a temporary use permit?
Not anymore. We're removing it from the temporary use. Certain zones allow gravel pits. You can permit a gravel pit, but not in temporary zones, and that's where we have the concern is setting up gravel pits in certain zones as a temporary use.
Because because according to the Division of Air Quality, the gravel pits have to get an air quality permit before they can open up.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if that should be a conditional use permit or a,
In certain zones, they are listed as a conditional use in certain zones.
Well, they're not a permitted use anywhere, are they?
No, they're not
A
permitted in.
a gravel permit is not a permitted use in any of our zones.
No. So that's what we did. We deleted out gravel pits from any type of temporary use because there's so many other regulations with them. So if someone came in for a gravel pit, we'd look and make sure, yes, it is a conditional use in, whether industrial zone or mining and grazing zone, whatever zone, and make sure that it's a conditional use. Make sure they come in for the proper permits to get their air quality permits, get everything from the state or whatever other permits are required.
yeah, because this is also a federal situation because this is a mine.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to have a Mine Health and Safety Administration ID number.
Yep.
And there's no way they could get a gravel permit from our county without meeting those state requirements. And the state requirements are going to impose the federal ones as well. So
Talking to the Division of Air Quality, they are not concerned with anything that the federal government may require. They're just making sure that the gravel pit meets the air requirements for the state. They're not concerned with what happens with Uncle Sam. They're dealing strictly with air quality.
you're talking about DEQ?
Yes.
But DEQ for the most part has adopted pretty similar standards, haven't they?
Well, according to the people at Air Quality, all this people have to do is apply for an air quality permit. And it will probably be a small source exempt, but they have to do all the paperwork, all the calculations to come up with what dust emissions or exhaust will be occurring at that site. And that's for air quality. But
Okay.
then Uncle Sam comes in and says, this is now a mine, and you have to also abide by
Sure.
federal standards. But I don't know if the state is requiring them also to visit the federal government.
Well, the way our Section 5 of conditional uses is written, it says that the county can adopt those state and federal regulations with respect to, they can make meeting all state and federal regulations a requirement with respect to any conditional use that's required. And in fact, it's always been Todd's practice to require that for every single, Todd's practice has always been, if there's another agency that requires something, you've got to meet that agency's standards. When I say Todd's standards, Todd's been, I know, conscientious at making sure that's met and then informing the Planning Commission of those other requirements. So I think I'm sure that will happen. That what I haven't said, what we don't have in Section 5 is something that says you must always meet all or you must always obtain those permits first before we give you a permit, because sometimes those agencies say, we first want to see the county, that the county has given you a permit. So what we've often said is, well, we will give you our county permit, but it can be revoked if you don't get the requisite state and federal permits. But yes, we'll be mindful of that on those.
You wanted to interject a comment there when we were talking about that. It's in your bailiwick, so to speak.
I think your attorney covered it pretty well. Air quality does receive its primacy from the federal government, so they are enforcing federal air rules under the guise of state rules.
Yes, I understand that,
Yeah,
but even in the state rules from the federal government, it doesn't say you need to go to another
Correct.
agency and get another,
Correct.
and get this identification.
correct. Yeah.
Just meet whatever air quality standards the federal government has and the state has, and then we can issue you a permit to go
Correct.
ahead.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panel? Everybody's quiet. Tell me what we want to do with this.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would be willing to make that motion that we move this on to the county commission for their approval.
Is there a second to that?
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Thank you, Gary. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. The next item is the review and possible recommendation of the county commission of proposed amendments to the Carbon County Development Code, Section 6, subdivisions, and we have a copy of that given out to us tonight. We've had some discussions on this prior. Comments and concerns on this item?
Hey, I have some more comments on the fire flow.
Okay.
I talked to you before. I pulled the state codes and it's 1,000 gallons a minute unless the fire marshal overrules that. And also, it's 1,000 gallons a minute for 60 minutes. The biggest concern I have is out by my house. It's all 4-inch lines, and the county code's 500 gallons a minute, and we can hit that with the fire hydrants. But if it runs for more than a few minutes, the houses upstream go dry, and so then it starts back siphoning everything from their, troughs or whatever it's in. So I think that's kind of, I don't know, 500 gallons a minute just to me isn't quite enough. But
So would your recommendation be to change that to 1,000 gallons a minute?
I don't even know if we have to go 1,000. I mean, 1,000's a lot, and
Okay.
a lot of our hydrants won't hit that.
Yeah.
But 500, I mean, most, even the ones on the 4-inch line, but somewhere around 700 seems like it works good. They seem to keep good pressure and volume. But when you get down into 500, I mean, even the 4-inch lines can hit that for a few minutes. So,
Mr. McFarland, and you've got prior experience in this world, what will a 4-inch line accommodate pressure-wise and gallonage?
the ones out by my house will hit right about 510 gallons a minute. But after a couple minutes of Pace Hanson's house goes dry. And so that's my biggest concern on that is, it's a loop system, and so it's actually coming 2 different ways to the 4-inch, and then it's just one line going up to Pace's. And that's the only place in the county that I know of that's that bad, is out 3,000 south and then up 500 east, right in that area.
Another comment? See, you got to be on the agenda a whole bunch of times tonight.
We're glad you're here today.
I review a lot of the drinking water systems for subdivisions, for DEQ, for drinking water. The way drinking water handles that is we go by the county fire marshal or the county development code. And so we would basically comply with whatever you guys recommended. That being said, we do mandate all new subdivisions have to have 8-inch lines. If they have a hydrant, they have an 8-inch line. So just by the fact of having the 8-inch line, you might have 1,000 GPM right there. It depends on the rest of the system, of course.
Yeah, and all new construction I know of, you know, for quite a few years has been putting in 8-inch.
8-inch, yeah. The old stuff's grandfathered, and we recognize that. We recognize there's substandard fire flow all over the place in rural Utah. But going forward, we want the 8-inch and fire hydrants, and that usually does support 1,000 GPM.
Oh, for sure, 8-inch will, yep.
Yeah.
Can we add just an 8-inch line is this the right place to do that, or?
The state does that.
Standards too,
You could certainly duplicate ours. We already have that.
And that's one thing that we need to continue to work on is some specific adoption of standards. We do have some, you know, within our different sections. That's where I've talked to our engineering department, our road department specifically, and have, okay, 8-inch lines, you know, whether it's adopted from drinking water or some other national standard, AASHTO, or, you know, any other manuals that may be out there that we can adopt that puts those standards there, so when they come in and say, okay, in chapter X is all the standards that we have. We fall under, we kind of follow all of Pri-Wise when it comes to water lines. So if Pri-Wide approves it, then, and everything on the new subdivisions I've been a part of, they've all been 8-inch lines.
Yeah, it's a minimum they can put in.
And but getting specific standards so people know what they're designing to, we need to adopt those specific standards. So
one of the things our minute said was we would look at what Pri-Wide's, whether Pri-Wide had specific standards on that. Do they not have, does Pri-Wide just follow ours? Is that what they're going to do, or?
no, and I don't have the
What their fire,
the
is that called fire flow? Is that what? we're
yeah,
talking
I don't have I don't have the sheet with me, but they've given us, you know, the requirements that they have that Jeff says, yep, it meets those standards, and so then we go ahead and approve it.
Are those expressed the same way as in, you know, gallons per minute? Like,
Yeah,
Kurt was talking
there's certain
about?
PSI and gallons per minute that has their minimum standards.
do we know what those are?
Off the top of my head,
I mean,
I don't know what they are.
I'm just looking at our minutes from last time, and Kurt had a question on the fire hydrant's flow pressure, what the standard is, and whether it's if gallons permitted is the same as the state, and we were going to check and see what the Pri-Wide requirement on minimum gallons per minute were. I just wonder if we need to make sure that all matches up, or if maybe I'm not looking at it right. Maybe we don't need to look at Pri-Wide's. Maybe Pri-Wide isn't going to be any different than the state, but
I think,
or if
I
they
think
don't
we
have
need to
separate
go off
ones.
What the county has required, because, you know, we've always met the 500. I know a couple of years ago we started doing a dynamic test where we had the lower fire hydrant going, and then the other had to meet 500, and like the ones out by my area, they can't do that. But I just think we ought to clear it up, and I'm not sure the best way.
Yeah.
I know the test that they was doing about when I left there, where they had the lower fire hydrant open, and then it had to meet 500 gallons. That would be a good test.
Yeah, and that's what they still currently do, is they open 2 fire hydrants and
I just
meet
think-
those minimums, and
Yeah,
we have a sheet with them on there. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head.
because just how it's spelled out in here doesn't say it that way.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I just think if it's spelled out that way, I agree. I think that test is plenty good. You know, if you have a dynamic test, but
Any other comments on section? So there was, like I said, there's a couple other items that we changed from the public hearing. I can't. It was a minor change, and now water, and then we had changed on line 383. We added Utah Division of Water Rights instead of just Division of Water Rights. There was, if I remember correctly, a couple places where we still had Planning Commission in there. We've changed that to the Planning Commission, same with amended plats, so that the Planning Commission can now change or address amended plats. So we took that out. Other than that, those minor changes, that was it.
So are you gonna add that section of the dynamic testing in?
Yeah, I can add that. Because I know Prywide does it, but we don't have it
Right, that's-
written here.
Okay.
So,
I said we added it as a
I'll-
requirement.
So your motion would be to change the language to include that,
Yeah.
and then present it to the county commission for
Yeah.
adoption?
I'll make a motion to approve the amended draft with the exception to hydro testing, that we have it specifically state what's the current testing procedure Prywide uses.
I'll second it.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we, with those changes, make the recommendation of the Carbon County Commission for the amendments to section 6 on subdivisions. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next item we have are legislative updates by Todd Thorne. He said this would be about a 20-minute discussion.
Yes.
So what I wanted to go over was just some of the legislative updates, some of the bills that were passed this last legislative session. So we'll just kind of go briefly over some of them. So we had the House Bill 259 Moderate Income Housing Amendments that requires a county to adopt a moderate income housing growth plan, but also repeals the requirement for a county to conduct a biennial review of the plan. So there's been some exceptions where certain counties of certain populations haven't had to do those. So our moderate income housing plan is quite old, something that we right on that threshold of whether we were required to do it or not, but it's something that needs to be updated, and they've added some clarification on that.
So Todd, on that one, because I have questions in general about that anyways, in one section of it says everyone is required except towns, and then further on it says counties of this class, this class, this class, cities of this class. Did we get further clarification about that?
We haven't, Christian and I talked briefly about it, but we haven't gone through and got that exactly what it means for us as a county yet.
And Todd asked me to look at that this afternoon, and I just kind of ran out of time. I haven't checked it out yet.
So we're right on the cusp of whether we have to do it. So it'll be a good thing to update. They've changed some of the requirements that are in there. So we'll look at updating just because it'd be good to have in general. The next one is land use amendments. So clarifying conditional use permits, where it imposes requirements on a proposed condition for a proposed conditional use, states that it's an administrative action decision. We can impose standards that conflict with the state or other. This chapter is the Chapter 17 of counties, so you can't conflict with any of those. And they have to mitigate any detrimental effects. Some of the new language that was added is where it's underlined. If you propose reasonable conditions, they need to be stated on record and reasonably related to the anticipated effect. So, and that's what we've been doing. We've been reading the conditions so everyone understands what's on the conditional use when they agree to it. And that you as a land use authority, you can approve or deny the conditional use. Building permits and impact fees. So what we deal with most of the time is people just come in and says, I have a permit, and they can just do what they want, which isn't necessarily true. There's some in the larger areas on the Wasatch Front, people have been fighting over impact fees. People pay impact fees and they feel like sometimes the cities or counties or improvement districts don't spend those fees within a reasonable time. And there's a way to challenge that if you want to try to get part of the impact fee done. Also now, part of the building permit fees goes to the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman to provide land use training. So before that wasn't a part of it, where now they have some funds to do more of that. This is just some information. Every building permit that comes in, we have to charge a 1% fee. And now 30% of that, of the 1%, goes to provide education for building inspectors, 10% to the construction trades, and then 60% of it goes to the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman. So, and they're going to provide more training, just like we had Brent Bateman come down earlier this year. So there's a few changes on fire code amendments that are requiring access and construction and demolition of structures, setting requirements for the fire department connections, and the permits required for temporary permit roads. So just those temporary roads that are built so that firefighters can get there. This just goes through some more of the detail, the required maintenance, and the access to those roads. Plan review amendments. When, as a building department, we're charged with reviewing plans. It clarifies how long we have. It allows someone to waive that requirement for a building permit review. We have to approve projects for residential construction within 14 days. And if it's something that's a commercial project, you have to approve it within 21 business days. Generally, our department, we get those done within a week. A lot of these things are aimed at the larger urban counties that are swamped with building permits, and people are held up for months. It doesn't apply for towns. And also the applicant can waive his requirement for the timeline. Here's something we may deal with is small wireless facilities that counties can regulate. A wireless support structure is something like a monopole tower building, a billboard and building that those facilities are within, and a utility pole is just the communication, distribution, lighting, traffic control. So allowing those in different places, we can regulate them as a county. So when we approve subdivisions, so as the Planning Commission approves subdivisions, we have to submit them to the state GIS department so that they can coordinate the 911 emergency services. And we have to submit those within 30 days. So we have to submit it to a public safety answering point, and I had no idea what that was, so I had to do some Googling to figure out what this was. And there was a contact here in Price. I forgot her name off the top of my head. But she routes all the 911 calls. So what the intent is when subdivision has been approved, once again in urban areas, the addresses weren't getting sent to emergency contacts within the EMS system and 911, so they couldn't find houses when people had an emergency. We don't have that problem. We don't have that many subdivisions where we have to worry about getting the addressing correctly and keeping those going. Once this is just going through, saying we have 30 days to submit it, so they can we can coordinate those efforts. Billboards goes through and talks if we wanted to do some eminent domain, how we can acquire those billboards, and requires requirements for a owner to remove the billboard under certain conditions. Our business licensing that modifies prohibition on charging a fee for a home-based business. If somebody requests a business license, we can now charge a fee. It's a weird situation where if they ask for one and they don't need one, now we can charge them because they asked for one. So thanks for...
Does that mean that they don't need a business license per se?
So there are some home-based businesses that are exempt from business licenses. But if they want one and they're requesting one, we could then charge them for that. But certain home-based businesses you can issue one without making them pay. Or they don't need it, but if they want it, to me, it's, you just don't ask. If they tell you don't need a business license or you're exempt, then you just walk away. As soon as you ask for one, then they can charge you, is what I got out of it.
It sounds kind of ridiculous that, I mean, that used to be one of the control mechanisms that the county would have, for example, to help in at least knowing what businesses were out there, whether they're operating in a home or what have you. But now it seems as if that's not necessary, meaning that people can run these businesses out of their homes without any knowledge.
So they can come in, and we have where we waive a lot of the fees because they're a home-based business. But and tell them we could waive it, and the way I read it is there's a, if they, I'll have to read it to explain it better. If people request it and they don't need one, we can charge them for processing one.
That's really helpful.
Yeah. So food trucks, this is a hot topic. It restricts the political subdivision ability to regulate a food truck through land use ordinances, and it also prohibits certain regulations of food trucks on private property. But it doesn't prevent a subdivision from requiring them to comply with the zoning regulations or creating local ordinances and regulations consistent with that section that addresses how and where a food truck may operate. So you can't prohibit a food truck in a zone where a food establishment is permitted, and you can't prohibit the operation of a food truck within a given distance of a restaurant, and you cannot restrict the total number of days a food truck operator may operate a food truck within your jurisdiction. You also you can't require a food truck to provide a site plan for the food truck if it's operating within the right-of-way, and you don't need to require for them to obtain and pay for a land use permit for each location during the time the food truck operates. And a bunch more. If you have consent of the private property owner to operate, you can't limit the number of days on private property. And so it was a big issue once again in urban areas where these food trucks are popular, allowing them to operate. Oil and gas, we
So,
can.
Todd,
oh, yeah.
back on that food trucks, can you, I haven't read the bill, but can you restrict them to actually need to be operable? Because I can see junk trucks that people put a sign on and say it's their food truck, and
There's nothing in there that states that they have to be operable. And they're every year, I mean,
But
because
there's
it's a
nothing-
big trend.
There's nothing that prohibits that, right? So you could actually require that locally.
Yeah. Yeah, you could require it locally because there's nothing saying that stops you from someone parking a camp trailer and saying now it's a food truck, or a motorhome that's broken down saying it's a food truck. You could say it has to be, I'm assuming it could be operated and maintained and functional, so it could leave the location. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Regulations of oil and gas. The counties can regulate oil and gas activities. We can enact an ordinance or resolution that regulates surface activities within our area. But doesn't affect or unduly limit, ban, or prohibit an oil and gas activity, and does not interfere with the state's exclusive jurisdiction to regulate oil and gas. So we do have a lot of that in our area. So there are other restrictions we could put on oil and gas as long as it doesn't interfere with what they're doing. And the last one, last year, the county adopted a county resource management plan. We submitted that to the state. The state took that from all 29 counties submitted a resource management plan. The state took that, rolled it into one big resource management plan, and the state adopted a statewide plan in January. So that was the last of the land use updates.
Have you heard if that's accessible, that plan?
Yes, the statewide one.
Yes.
Yes, if you go to PLIPCO, Utah Public Land Coordinating Office, they have a link to the statewide plan. It's very high level, where ours gets down to the very specifics and the nitty gritty on it.
But it's also a data source for all that data that was collected and.
Yes. Yep. Any questions on that? I didn't hear anyone snoring too loud, so.
No, very good. Thank you, Todd. Mr. Spencer Lovelace had some comments he wanted to make to us to close the meeting. So Spencer, I'll turn the time over to you for a few minutes.
Okay, and I guess this is just not really, I guess more comments than anything, because I like the amendments that are happening. I realize it helps push the possibility of businesses progressing faster because we have standards in place that they don't need to be voted on or anything like that. I also like what was going on in passing some of the approval responsibilities down to the zoning commission so that gets pushed through faster. And I guess this comes more from a more general, but with some restrictions that they're putting in place and other I guess requirements we've adopted, are we doing anything as a planning and zoning committee to really make it easier for businesses to get things passed? For example, the guy that came in today, he's not gonna get approved for 30 days on something that he can do. Like, that's kind of silly.
What guy's this?
Scott.
No, he's already operating. He has a conditional use permit that was issued to him in good faith back in the fall of last year. So he's been operating with his conditional use permit under the promise that he was going to come into compliance. So he received his conditional use permit even before he was in compliance with it. And he indicated he would come into compliance in 30 days. So it's actually the opposite of what you just said. He has not been restricted from operating. He's been operating all this time
Yes.
in violation of the conditions of that permit.
And I'm not specifically speaking about him for restrictions. I was just bringing up the example that he was asked to submit a plan. He wanted to be completed within 30 days, but he has to submit a plan within 30 days of how he's going to comply. And I realize there's baggage before that.
Yeah, he was supposed to have submitted that plan a long time ago too, which he did by hand, shoddily.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can go, you're right, he's not the good example to use because he has been obstinate in not complying.
On the other hand, I think it's a perfect example of why we've got to review these thoroughly, get what we want, what's best for the community, and then they can move forward.
Before you came on board, we did make some changes to make it so that a business now does not have to go to both the county commission and the planning commission in order to get a conditional use permit. He only has to go now in front of the planning commission. So if he were to have brought let's say he were starting from scratch and brought his plan to us, all he has to do is get that onto the agenda one time here, and it comes and it would be heard that next month, and unless it's a major project, it wouldn't even require a public hearing. So major projects, now his would have required a public hearing, I believe, because, no, it wouldn't have. Well, it might. Certain things require public hearings, but certain things don't. Smaller things that can just be quickly reviewed don't even require a public hearing, which has sped up the time much faster. At that point, then all you have to do is get your application in time to get it on the agenda. So I think we have done some things to really speed up businesses getting their applications in here.
Okay.
And in fact, I've received comments that we've gone too far that way. So,
well, we also have the administrative things that can be approved without the planning commission that weren't previously done as well. So I think the biggest hang up is sometimes people, for example, I think it was last month where we were approving something with it conditional upon getting the zone change. But obviously that's a legislative action too. So we have to follow the law too. I think it's probably about as streamlined as it can get.
I disagree with that. I wholeheartedly disagree with that, because if you think we're as streamlined as you can get, we're never going to get better. So.
Well, obviously there's room for improvement, but I mean, within the confines of the law, I think we're about as good as we can do at the moment. There's always ways to fix things to improve them.
And you're always welcome, I would mention this, you're always welcome to, any planning commission member has the right to say, guys, let's consider this amendment to whatever section of our development code, because I think this will streamline things and improve things. So any of you can do that and put that on as an action item, or you can ask me or Todd to look at, drafting some language with respect to improving a process. We're certainly always willing to consider that.
So what ways do you think we could...
I'm just speaking...
Can we turn the lights back on here?
I'm just speaking from a general standpoint as far as people's opinion of it takes forever. And granted, the grass is always greener on the other side, but you always hear of Carbon County being hard to do business in. And so how can we, and granted, it's people talking, take it for what it's worth, but how can we change that opinion of others? How can we be that county that's willing to work with others? And granted, you don't compromise safety, you don't compromise state laws or federal laws, but from a county, what bounds do we have to streamline that even better?
And if we...
Planning and zoning issue?
I don't know.
Is it a planning and zoning issue? Is it a planning and zoning issue? I repeat that because I think we try to move things through here as quickly as possible and in a way to accommodate those that make applications. If there's delays elsewhere in the county, Jake will fix those.
And you're right. You're absolutely right.
Well, and I think you're talking about, I think the county, the public at large does not know of the, yeoman's work that was done by this board in making some very major changes to our development code, which now speeds up a lot of things. Yeah, I don't know that there's enough publicity about those because, you know, you come in here and ask for a conditional use permit, you're going to get heard very quickly now.
So if there's specifics, I'd be glad to work with you and identify those specifics and saying, okay, what is it that's holding businesses up? From my perspective, there's really not much we can do to speed up, especially conditional uses. There's not another county that I'm aware of that will approve. You submit your application 2 weeks before, you can have it approved in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So there's not, I don't think there's another county that will approve conditional uses as quick as us. So I think there might be some misinformation out there, and if there are problems that we're not aware of as bureaucrats, let us know so we can address those, that we aren't holding people up.
Yeah.
But without knowing specifics and just things that are floating in the air, we can't address those. And if it's a perception thing, then we need to get word out that here's how it is. We've worked with a methane flare company to permit a methane flare. Windmills that is significantly faster than other counties that they've worked with. So those things probably need to be brought to light, that we do try to get them going forward.
No, and there's no specifics. It was just more from abroad, just wondering if because coming in, you know, I've been here 3 weeks, but and that change from, you know, being able to do stuff here from the county, I'm like, that's awesome, that's great.
Yeah.
Good job. And so it's more just from a planning standpoint, you know, is this, are we sure we're trying, but are we really actively trying?
Yeah. And with regards with tonight, I mean, there's nothing stopping him from getting it completed, and then we'll check in July and say, yeah, he's done. So as fast as he wants to move,
yeah,
he can move, and then I'll come in July and say, yeah, he's done. So, or he still hasn't done anything. So now what do we want to do? So it's up to him. He's had 6 months, 7 months to address it and hasn't done anything. So that's on the business end. We're just making sure everything's followed up. So, but yeah, anything we can do to make it faster, we'll do it within reason.
Anything
Yeah.
else, Spencer?
no, that's it, thank you.
Would accept a motion to adjourn.
One more, a couple updates.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
So I just got a email from Danny Blanton about 4 o'clock, who has resigned from the Planning Commission. So just an FYI, Danny's gone off the commission. I told him I didn't have to accept his resignation, but I don't think he liked my email back. And the other one, with the zone change that we reviewed last month for that butcher shop, the county commission denied the zone change, and so that conditional use permit now is invalid.
What was the reason they denied the zone change?
Because of the residential area around where they're trying to zone change it, they felt that it should remain residential. That was their reasoning behind it. So they're looking for somewhere else to go in the county, but I haven't heard anything from them where they're wanting to go. And that's the only 2 updates that I had.
Can I call to adjourn now? Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it.
I second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
For a building permit, but that's it.
I hope so. I contacted Utah Railway. I contacted them and they sent me back an email that said we have tentatively got business that was making
What he mentioned was the conditional use thing that
doing
we
anything else.
mentioned.
So I'm like,
One
well,
of the other hard things.
we don't care.
yeah, so I'm guessing that whoever is doing the
There's a misconception of Missouri is getting permits.
that's it.
But I need a price, anywhere from $1,000 to $500,000. This is how I get a blueprint, is we can't capture it. And, we take, less than commercial review all the time. Issuing those.
I apologize, I keep calling that traffic.
Well, and you can say that, and go to some other counties and see what they require, what they have to do for conditional use permits, and I don't, other than.
Except for helper.
Other
Helper's really
than
fast.
completely eliminating conditional use permits. That's the only thing we can do is completely eliminate conditional use permits.
And then part of it, I think, is I don't know what